Let's talk to Dan Hodges, though, commentator at the Mail on Sunday, of course. Dan, very good morning to you.
Morning.
We're seeing the final hurdle. It's off into the distance, but you know, the final furlong is now upon us. It's been a strange campaign, I would say. But what's your kind of pervading view of what's going to happen? Because I'm not sure that these MRP polls are entirely correct, but I can't see anything but quite a big Labour victory.
I think I agree with you. I mean, I think the Tories are going to get annihilated tomorrow. Frankly, I mean, I think there's a reckoning coming for them. I think we'll get a few odd results. I think that. I mean, my own view is I think possibly Reform's vote, if anything, could be being slightly underestimated. Certainly from my
I think that's true as well.
My travels around the country, I think there is probably more appetite for reform than the polls are picking up. Whether that will translate into seats is another matter. I think another thing to watch out for, and something that hasn't really been discussed during this campaign, is although I think obviously Labour are going to win a very large majority, I do think the Labour vote is haemorrhaging in those areas with significant Muslim constituencies.
Right.
I think that could throw up one or two sort of rather odd results tomorrow.
Yeah.
But broadly, I'm not convinced by this sort of narrative that there's this sort of significant late swing back to the Tories. No. I'm always sceptical of polls in the last week of the campaign, because we tend to see a little bit of herding. And also the other thing is, obviously, we're talking about people voting tomorrow. A very significant number of people have already voted because of the postal votes, and those votes passed at a time when there wasn't a swing back to the Tories, when the Tories' poll rating was basically continuing to go off the cliff.
Right. Although a lot of those postal votes may or may not be arriving in time, because we're told that the Royal Mail are now this morning saying it's all the fault of the government for calling an election we weren't expecting. I'm not quite sure of the logic of that, since if you run a postal voting system, it should be ready to go whenever you want to run it, shouldn't it?
Well, exactly. I mean, that's just ridiculous. But I mean, as we've all seen in various instances over the last couple of years, they're not always on the ball. So, but I'd be surprised if that makes a huge difference, if I'm perfectly honest. I mean, but I think a lot, as I say, and I mean, the one thing I would say is I would guess, because of the legacy of COVID, there may well be, I mean, people are saying to me they expect there will actually, if anything, be a higher postal vote turn.
Yeah. Well, apparently there's going to be 2 million more postal votes this time around than there were in 2019, which is up to 8 million, which is an awful lot. Boris Johnson last night sort of came out of retirement, if you like, and was the same old Boris, but it seemed a bit like a sort of a throwback. I was saying this earlier to somebody else. It seemed like somebody from a bygone era.
Yeah, I mean, and I said it last night. I mean, I was speaking to a couple of people in the Tory party last night who were basically saying what actually happened was, I don't know if you saw, there was the sort of the widely circulated clip of Theresa May knocking on someone's doorbell, and she was on the sort of the doorbell camera, and she was out there, working. She's obviously stepping down from Parliament, and she was out there, putting in the hard yards. And a significant number of people in the Tory party were suddenly saying, well, hang on a second, she's out there. Where the hell's Boris? He's off on holiday while we're all fighting for our lives. So I think, I'm going to be completely honest, I think it was quite a cynical move by Boris. He just thought, oh God, I'd better turn up at the end just to show I've done a little bit. I mean, he turned up, did his speech. Apparently he was off before Rishi had even finished speaking.
Yeah. I don't think they actually saw each other. I don't think they actually physically met each other.
They didn't appear with each other.
Right.
It was just Boris basically just going through the motions a little bit.
Yeah, I think so.
And it will have zero impact.
And in terms of Labour getting in and starting off, hitting the ground running, if you like, on Friday, do you think they're ready? Do you think they've actually got themselves together? I mean, Keir Starmer's kind of point has been, I suppose, over the last 6 weeks to show that they are ready for government, that he has changed the party, that, you know, the nutters have all left and it's the grown-ups in the room and all of that kind of narrative. But are they really?
Yeah, I mean, I think, look, they've been preparing for power for what? I mean, properly preparing for power for about 12 to 18 months now. I mean, they've known from a long way out they were going to win this election. So on that sense, they are prepared, but you can never be completely prepared for events. I mean, one of the things I was being told at the weekend, I mean, one of the things that they're looking at most closely at the moment in Keir Starmer's inner circle, they're all looking at the weather forecast for next week. Because what they're terrified of is if we get really good weather next week, then they're terrified there's going to be a surge in small boat arrivals if the channel is calm and the weather is good, and that could immediately, you know, define the first few days of his premiership. So they are prepared, but you can only be so prepared. There are certain things that just.
Well, we've already seen one story today in the Telegraph about 200 migrants who were apparently being held in detention in anticipation of their being sent to Rwanda. But of course, now a judge has ruled that since there's no likelihood of that actually happening, because if Labour get in and that's what they think is going to happen, that's what they've been told by the civil servants, they won't be going anywhere. So they've just released them. So 200 people who were under detention have now got the right to walk around on the streets. Nobody knows what's happened to them. I
find that incomprehensible. I mean, you do actually have to wait for the result of the election.
Yeah, I know, but that's
we can all make our assumptions, but I would have thought the judiciary and the legal system operate on a slightly different level to that. Look, I mean, I think that is going to be. I know speaking to people close to Keir Starmer, that is their biggest concern. That is their number one, top of their list is what do we do about the small boats? And frankly, as we've seen through the campaign, they haven't really come up with an answer about what to do with the small boats. No. So that's why there's so much concern.
No, absolutely right. Listen, great to talk to you, Dan. I'm sure we'll see you. I don't know if you're around on election night, but if you are, we'd be love to have you. Mail on Sundays, Dan Hodges there, of course.